Hey everybody, welcome back to another Thursday night live at home with Olympus. We are kicking off the Into the Forest month with Olympus this month, and we're really excited about that project. I know that we've got a pinned comment on Facebook about that project where we're just really taking this month to step back and appreciate the forest for all that it is and make efforts to go out and explore the forest where you safely can. I feel for all of my Northern California buddies out here dealing with, the Dixie and Caldor fires, but being responsible, photographing the forest, and just truly appreciating how magnificent it is. And so tonight, we're going to have a special guest that joins us and talks about his time in the forest. But before we bring him on, I do want to do some housekeeping things that we go through every single week, but I'm going to do it again because I love you guys. We are recording this session. Don't worry if you came in late or you have to log off early. Don't worry. As soon as we're done with this live stream, you will be able to go back and watch it on both our Facebook and YouTube page. We will answer comments at the end, or questions, I should say, at the end. We'll have a nice Q&A session at the end, just like we always do. So save your very, very important questions for the end, and we'll pop those on screen when we can. And like I said, check out Olympus Into the Forest. We've got a great month of programming planned. We've got articles on how to explore the forest safely, conservation efforts that you can make for the forest, how to safely photograph wildlife in the forest. We also have a forest photo contest going, so you definitely want to check that out and share your best wilderness photography with us. We'd love to see it. So for now, I think I should invite our guest. So we have Olympus photographer Arthur Lefo joining us tonight. Let's bring him on. Hi, Art. How's it going?
Hey, Misha, how's it going? Hey, guys.
Not too bad. We have people from all over tonight, even England, even though I know it's very late there. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you guys should go to bed.
I know, right? Oh, we've got Dax. We've got Dax. He's from our UK team. Nice to see you, Dax. He is up way too late watching us tonight. So, Art, where are you from? Where are you at?
I'm a little from all over. Born in France, raised in Florida. I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, though. That's where most of my photography comes from the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, Alaska, and all the high latitude regions. So a bit all over the place.
Yeah, you get to live in all the great outdoorsy places, though. That's nice.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I can't complain.
So today, what topics are you going to cover tonight?
So I'm sort of going to run through my process in wildlife photography when I enter the forest, which is where the majority of my work takes place these days. So I'm going to sort of run through how I prepare for the forest, how I find wildlife, how I like to sort of respect my surroundings and keep myself mindful in this environment. And then I'll sort of dive into, the tech settings, the gear, all that stuff that everybody I'm sure wants to know. And I'll also sort of run through 3 different examples of shots that I've become really proud of, shots that were memorable moments in the wild for me, and sort of get behind the scenes as to like how I capture these moments and sort of have you guys understand a little bit about what went into creating these shots.
Awesome. That sounds really exciting. Well, do you want to get your slideshow prepared for us? And then I'll pop it up on the screen. I'm going to dip out of here and let Art do the talking. We will be in the comment section, though, to help you guys out. And like I said, at the end of this session, we'll do a Q&A, and it'll be lots of fun. You can ask all your questions then, all right? All right, so we got this on the screen. I'm out of here. Thank you, Arthur.
Cheers. Hey guys, so thanks again for joining. This is really exciting for me. I'm really grateful to have you all here tuning in as I take you guys on a walk through the forest. I think a good way to start this off is really to highlight the fact that as wildlife photographers, I think we all value nature and we all value the wilderness. And so this is sort of the guiding mantra behind this presentation is not just how to get photography of wild animals, good photos, impactful images, and good light, finding the animals, but beyond that, how to create your own luck by using nature and exploration to your advantage, so to say. So I'll sort of start diving right in here because we have a few things to cover. So silence, stillness, wilderness. These are the three words that really came to mind when I started writing up this presentation and the Olympus article that was published just last week. These three words are sort of the first three words that come to mind for me when I enter the forest, when I think of the forest, when I think of my time that I spend in the forest and how I enjoy the forest. Much like the animals that seek out the forest for peaceful refuge, I think that we as humans seek out the forest and nature as a whole as some sort of a refuge from the everyday hassles of life in society and urban areas. Most of us live in urban areas, so it's always a very welcome escape. And so sort of the general idea behind this presentation is definitely to sort of maintain these three words in effect. So silence, stillness, and wilderness. When I enter an area in the wilderness, this is what I think of, and this is what I try to maintain. So let's get started here. First things first, let the forest find you. Now, what do I mean by this? I think it's easy as photographers, as wildlife photographers in specific, to sort of let ourselves become consumed by the latter part of that word, right? We're photographers. We're trying to capture a moment. We want to get the shot. And that's great and all. I'm not here to try and pretend like we're not all trying to get the shot, because we all want to get impactful imagery, right? But I think that focusing on that sort of detracts from our goal in many cases, right? If you sort of pigeonhole yourself, tunnel vision yourself into the idea of like, I need to get this shot, I want to get a picture of a moose drinking out of a river or whatever it is that you're chasing in your local area, I think it's sort of counterintuitive to the process. So I like to focus more on the former part of that word, wildlife photographers. I like to focus on the wildlife. And if you break that down further, it sort of breaks down into wild and life, right? So the wilderness around me and the life that flourishes around me, and focusing on slowing down, being mindful, which in turn allows us to remain opportunistic about photography. One of the best tips that I was ever given from a fellow photographer friend who a few of you might know, Brooke Little Bear, she's an Olympus explorer, is to be opportunistic in your photography. And I really think that shines through as sort of the core idea behind wildlife photography. You know, wildlife photography is difficult because we can't control our subjects, and our subjects control us to a certain extent. So you need to be able to seize the opportunity when you're out there. So as I enter the forest, I really like to focus once again on sort of slowing down, thinking about the small things, right? You don't only need to think about large animals. You know, it's nice to pay attention to smaller details, like how small bugs that sort of float around in the air are backlit by the sun and they look like little fireflies, or, you know, the squirrel up in the tree that's tossing pine cones down to sort of prepare his winter reserves. There's so much magic that goes on beyond large mammals in the forest, and I think paying attention to the details sort of grounds us and lets us put ourselves in a position where we're ready to succeed. So as I enter the forest, I like to remind myself of the world I'm entering. I mean, in reality, when we enter the forest, we're entering the animal's home. And when we enter a friend's home in the human world, we treat that home with kindness and respect. And I think we have no reason to treat our animal friends any differently. As a matter of fact, I think we should be treating them with more respect and kindness, given the challenges that nature and forests face today. You know, a lot of our wild lands and protected areas are under threat. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy and issues surrounding the protection of natural areas and many species, even to this day. So I really enter with this in mind. I'm entering someone else's home. I'm entering the animal's home. And my goal along my journey in the forest is to leave it how I found it, right? So I enter and I find it wild and beautiful. And when I leave it, I want it to be wild and beautiful. And wild means not disturbing everything from the flora to the fauna of what thrives in these environments. So Now we're going to start talking a little bit about how I go about finding wildlife, right? So you're sort of centering yourself, you're putting yourself in the present moment, being mindful, slowing down, being grateful, and now you want to find wildlife. So my first biggest tip is that preparation enhances application in this realm. So the more you prepare, the more you learn at home, the more you'll find yourself in the field sort of applying these concepts and integrating concepts that you've learned about and being mindful about your surroundings. So if you just go out blind and you don't really know much about your forest, you're going to walk through sort of aimlessly and bust around and look for animals and maybe get frustrated. I mean, I sure was like that when I started. I would just go looking for animals sort of aimlessly without any real goal or objective. And I think that ever since I've started preparing more beforehand, I'm noticing more details when I go out. I'm noticing small things. I'm seeing, a faint track in the sand. I'm noticing, sort of signs that I've seen multiple times when I return to an area several times. And it helps me, once again, ground myself, slow down, come back to the present moment. This is sort of like the leading idea behind this concept of silence and stillness. So prepare before you go out, and you'll be able to instantly apply this knowledge. Knowing your subjects. So as wildlife photographers, we're not portrait photographers. Well, we are portrait photographers, I should say. We're portrait photographers who do not have the ability to control our subjects. So when you're in portrait photography with humans, you can tell someone, hey, like, why don't you step over a few steps and like put your hand on your hip, look real cute. With wildlife, you simply can't do that. And we're at the mercy of our subjects. So knowing your subjects, learning as much about the animals in the forest, in the area that you're going to be frequenting is so, so, so important to knowing where to go and to refining your search as you go about it, right? And beyond knowing about the animals themselves that live in that area, knowing relationships between animals. So, and that's the bullet point here on interspecies relationships. I think that here in Jackson Hole, for example, a squirrel, and in many other forests, a squirrel often sounds an alarm to an intruder. That's a good sign when I'm out and about to look around, to slow down, to pay attention, to be like, hey, is there anything else out there? There are other fascinating relationships in the animal world, like the relationships between ravens and wolves who have a mutually beneficial relationship, or the relationship between otters and brook trout that we have here in Jackson Hole, where the brook trout spawn in the later parts of the fall, early winter, and the otters go back into these streams where the trout spawn and they sort of swim up and they start chewing on them. So knowing these interspecies relationships, predation, or mutually beneficial relationships between animals is so important to also being able to sort of connect the dots while you're out in the forest, because often one animal will lead to another or give way to another. Beyond that, also knowing about the variation in the animal's behavior based on seasons is so important. So, here in Jackson Hole, we have a lot of moose, about 700 moose here in Jackson Hole, very healthy population. In the summer, these moose are really high up in the alpine, sort of staying cool in alpine rivers, in very shaded areas, tall willows, deep valleys where the sun doesn't reach most of the day. So in the summer, you need to know, maybe there's moose in Jackson Hole, but you can't go looking for them in the same spot as you can in summer as you would in the fall. For example, when the moose come down, they strip their velvet, which they just did last week here, and they enter the rutting phase where they start the mating process. And the competition between males to earn the love and affection of cows. And so knowing the seasonal variation, or in this case, the photo that I used here for the slide is a young cinnamon phase black bear, photographed here in Grand Teton National Park just last year. Super cute little bear. And he's up in these bushes because he's looking for berries, the last pickings of the berries in the fall. So knowing the flora and the fauna of your area and the seasonal variation is sort of all integral to being able to find and capture these animals effectively. In terms of resources that I've used to succeed and that have set me up for success, I think that the internet wins. Facebook groups, photography groups, national parks groups, excuse me, local groups to the areas where you're taking photos that maybe don't involve photographers. We have a group here, for example, called Jackson Hole and Grand Teton National Park, and like a bunch of tourists will post stuff. So often there's leads in there. They post pictures of where they saw animals. Social media is great. Also, hunting forums. At the end of the day, as photographers, we are hunting. We're just shooting with a different tool. So we're implementing a lot of the same strategies to find wildlife, to either follow it or sit and wait for it. We're just capturing the animals in a different way. So hunting forums have been really useful for me too. A note on making friends, because at the end of the day, I think something that's helped me maybe the most of anything that I've done is really just being genuine, being myself, making friends, being friendly with as many people as I can. I've made outstanding friends in the photography industry and over the last few years. And I think that my development has been an ability to find and capture animals is greatly due in part to their help, and vice versa. You know, there's a really resilient community, especially within photography. And I think if you find the right people, you can definitely make some really great friends that will help you get in a position to succeed. And so to sort of wrap up this Know Your Forest section, I just wanted to take a quick second to make a note on off-trail travel. Many forests allow off-trail travel. Of course, I think it's always important to know where you're going. National parks frequently don't. Some areas in national parks might. But in the event that off-trail travel is allowed, I think it's always important to sort of remind yourself of this wild and beautiful, right? Silence, stillness, wilderness. You're entering the animal's home and you want to disturb it as little as possible. So when I am hiking off-trail, which of course is a fun part, bushwhacking is a super fun part of chasing animals, I try to stay mindful. Once again, using existing game trails, avoiding to step on sensitive plant life, not, busting and breaking through branches if I don't need to. So exhibiting this kind of mindset goes beyond just helping you, stay present and notice details. It helps you also respect the forest more. So now we're going to start looking for animals, right? This is what we came to do. We're wildlife photographers. We want to get the shot. We're centered. We're zenned out. We're fully in the moment in the forest. And so now we start looking for animals. And animals leave clues. So part of knowing your subject is also knowing how to find it. And I think that another benefit of slowing down and increasing your awareness is noticing these clues more effectively. Tracks tell stories. Tracks tell stories of time, right? A track like the one in the bottom left here that was left in the mud after a day of rain is a recent sign of an animal passing through. Some tracks in the top left are also recent signs of animals passing through. A sandy beach in southeast Alaska on the coast of the temperate rainforest there. A grizzly bear track there means that given how much it rains there, if the track is still visible, it's probably a few hours fresh. So it's a good idea to be mindful of the tracks you see. Are they dried out mud, or is, it's still seeping water into its crevices? And beyond that, revisit these areas, right? So animals leave these clues, and we have a tendency sometimes to go look for a wildlife someplace, and you don't see anything, so you're like, oh, I'll go look here next time. Well, maybe not. Slow down again. Go back to the same area. See if anything changes. See if you notice any new signs. See if maybe some of the berries on the bushes that were there before are no longer there. Again, be mindful of these details, and nature will sort of lead you in the right direction as you notice the things changing. So signs of past meals are a great way to find animals. Signs of downtime and sleep, that's the jackpot. If you can find a sign of an animal having spent the night somewhere, a bed, a bear bed, a moose bed, whatever it is, or having spent downtime in an area, it's generally, it's a gold mine. It really is. And it's a good idea to go back to that spot really early in the day before sunrise and sort of wait silently as the day comes up and see if you see anything. And again, back on the note of slowing down, it's really a blessing to be out in these places in and of itself. And I think that reminding yourself of this and pursuing that mindfulness is really sort of the first element in creating your own luck out here. So follow the light. This is maybe the biggest and most useful tip that I like to give people, right? As photographers, we are not capturing our subjects, we are capturing the light refracting off of our subjects. You could have the most incredible animal encounter with terrible light, and the photo is not going to be incredible. It's going to be okay. And you can have a pretty okay animal encounter with phenomenal light, and the photo is going to be pretty phenomenal. The light really drives the emotion and the mood and the colors and the way that your camera is able to capture what's out there. So when I set out into the forest, I really have this idea that I remind myself of, that I can't change the light. The light is there. It's either there, it's not, but I can change where I am. I can change where I think an animal might show up, where I might have the best light, give myself the best opportunity. So light is really dim. I like to focus on forest clearings, open meadows, riverbeds, areas where light is able to come in more. Maybe I think about, the geography of the map that I'm navigating, and I position myself in the mornings on the east side of a forest where the sun is going to be shining more rather than on the backside or a clearing within the trees. Always thinking about the light. And then midday, assuming it's a bluebird day, as the sun comes out, I sort of work my way deeper into the forest where the light is less harsh, where I have more opportunity to capture pictures of animals with softer light. Beyond the benefit that this provides to capture photos in impactful ways, it generally also correlates with increasing your odds at even seeing animals. Wildlife will often be out in open areas early in the morning. Elk, for example, here in the fall, almost every morning at the blue hour, we have hundreds of elk out in open fields. And by 8 a.m., all those elk are gone back into the forest. And so following the light also allows you to succeed, because wildlife will often do the same, right? They open areas when it's a bit safer, they navigate a little cautiously, but it's dark, they have less odds of being preyed upon. In the daytime, when it gets hot, they usually seek shade, cooler temperatures. Of course, this depends on the time of year and on weather. So if it's cloudy, maybe it's different and you might want to stick to open areas later. Again, just following the light. And this is putting yourself in a position to succeed from a standpoint of both seeing wildlife and capturing it. So follow the light. That's really where it all begins and where it ends as photographers. It starts and ends with light. Silence is golden. In some cases, it's not beneficial to be on the move. There certainly are benefits to being on the move, of course, is noticing new details, exploring an area. But I think that once you've developed good knowledge on an area, I think it's very useful to sort of slow down and sometimes just spend some time in silence, listening to things around you. A lot of times, animals might be just behind a few bushes and you would never know. It's like this morning I was out looking for black bears here, and I was walking through this trail with my friends, and off in the distance, we were sort of chit-chatting on the trail while we were walking by, because it's some friends that I hadn't seen in a while, and I just heard the slightest little branch crack, and I was like, wait a second. We slowed down and we listened for about 5 minutes, and another one came, and another crack, and another crack. Little did we know there was a mother black bear and two cubs 25 yards from us behind a few bushes, so we would have never seen them. But again, slowing down and sitting in silence and listening really brings about some details that you might never notice if you're just busting through bushes. And it kind of correlates again with respecting the animal space, respecting the world that we've entered. I think there's value in sort of maintaining the silence in the forest, beyond just increasing our odds at seeing wildlife. So once again, this is just another opportunity to slow yourself down, to ground yourself, to sort of come to terms with the area you're in, and give yourself the best odds at creating your own look, the best chances at succeeding. So here in the forest, the wild roams free, and so must we. So I like to set my expectations when I set out. This is sort of to recap this section of how I set out, right? I like to set my expectations for seeing wildlife low. At the end of the day, I'm here to enjoy nature. I'm here to enjoy wilderness. I'm here to disconnect, right? And sure, I want to get that shot. But at the end of the day, if I come home having spent a good day in wilderness and I enjoyed little details and I learned something, which you almost every time will go out and learn something new. It's a success. So I set my expectations for wildlife low and enjoyment high, and I never come out disappointed that way. Once again, we're creating our own luck here. As wildlife photographers, luck is an inherent part of our jobs. It takes luck to a certain extent to see wildlife. But it would also be naive to say, well, it's only luck, because I really believe in creating your own luck through preparation, through knowledge, through mindfulness, being present, and respecting the animal's home. The more you exhibit respect towards the animal's home, I think the more that's returned back to us. And don't force things. Let nature unfold as it should. Nature is designed in incredibly perfect ways beyond our comprehension. And I think that by slowing down and not forcing things, we're sort of able to let things come to life naturally. And as long as we're ready and we're ready to take that shot, and I'll sort of dive into this here in a second, and being opportunistic, good things will happen. So now we're going to get the shot. Excuse me. So, getting the shot. I'll start off with a quick note here on camera gear and lenses, because I know a lot of you probably have questions about the gear I'm using, or what my preferences are. So I'll give you guys a few tidbits here on like why I use the gear I use. I shoot on an OMD M1 Mark III predominantly, and my two best lenses for wildlife that I've been using lately are the 300mm f4 Pro, and the 40-150 f2.8 Pro. Incredible lenses. I've also had the chance to play around with the new 150-400 f4.5 with a built-in teleconverter. That lens is a beast. I'll be getting it soon. But in the meantime, these lenses have really kept me afloat for the last few years and have worked wonders. So why I shoot this? First of all, in wildlife photography and in the forest, where sometimes you have pretty distant encounters, or you're only able to caption a certain section that's not completely blocked up by ugly brown bushes or whatnot. Cropping is an essential part of wildlife photography, not just in the forest. This is across the board. So cropping, to set myself up for success with cropping, I like to use a camera that has a higher megapixel count. In this case, the M1 III has about a 21 megapixel count, which there are cameras out there with higher megapixels, but personally I've never felt the need to really go any higher. I've really had incredible success. Even this image that you see in the background, this is an image I called While the Kids Play. The image on the screen you see here is about 20% of the size of the original image, the original frame. And these days with all the post-processing software we have, you really don't need to go that crazy, I think. But megapixels are important. And having a good megapixel count is what allowed me to get a shot like this. Never miss with Pro Capture Mode. I assume most of you are Olympus photographers. Pro Capture Mode is sort of an essential tool in my repertoire to capturing wildlife. For those of you who don't know what Pro Capture Mode is, it's basically just a setting on the EM1s, EM1 III and 2 and the M1X, where you have pressed the shutter and your SD starts recording photos at either 15 or 30 or whatever photos per second. And when you click the shutter after an event has happened, so let's say a fish leaps out of water, it finishes the leap, you click the shutter, you have a full set of frames from the seconds prior to you clicking the shutter. So it's essential in capturing moments like a split second when an animal makes eye contact with you, or when an animal is exhibiting a really interesting sort of behavior, right? I've captured a lot of moments that I might have missed otherwise because of this. So it's a really neat tool. When we're in the forest, weatherproofing is one of the things I've loved the most about these cameras, to be honest. I beat up my gear. I really use it hard. And you're going out into the forest, you're bushwhacking, you're bound to get wet, you're bound to get muddy, you're bound to get dusty, dirty, everything under the above. So the weatherproofing has been essential. And most importantly here on this slide is telephoto lenses. So we can use wide angle lenses to capture wildlife in some scenarios, camera traps, but that's kind of a more complex topic I won't really dive into today. And sometimes, it's an animal in the landscape. But in the great majority of cases, especially in the forest, I find that telephoto lenses are really, really useful, not just to capture an image, in a closer look, have a better resolution on details on an animal, but also to maintain a safe distance from animals. I'll find myself sometimes, like this morning, for example, I was out photographing these black bears, like I was saying, and I had friends that were standing, a certain distance from the bear, and I was actually like double the distance away. I was shooting with this 300 millimeter f4 Pro. It's sort of my everyday go-to lens, and it's a prime lens, so I can't zoom in or out. And I actually found myself stepping back much further than I needed to be from an animal that actually benefits my photography too. So you're benefiting the animal by using telephoto because you're staying further away. You're also benefiting your photography because you're creating depth and distance, and you can sort of play with the composition and the bokeh in the image a little more. And I'll sort of jump into that here in a couple slides. So this is what I use. This is what I've relied on. It's been incredible gear. And so now let's take a dive into the settings and sort of what I get into with camera settings to capture these moments. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to acknowledge once again the fact that wildlife sightings can be fleeting. They can be really brief experiences. I have had moments with animals that have lasted, like in the case of this photo, this is a split second. I'll sort of tell you guys the story behind this photo before I carry on. This is a photo I took last August. For those of you who know the story about the grizzly bear 399, she's a very famous bear here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, worth a Google. She's basically a superstar. These are her cubs. She had 4 cubs last year at 25 years old. She's known as Greater Yellowstone's greatest mother, and a whole bunch of other reasons for her fame. But anyways, these cubs were sort of right off the side of the road. This photo is much more glorious in appearance than how I actually captured it. And so this photo, for example, I was driving down the road and I noticed a lot of rangers, and they had the whole section of this road in tight aspens coned off. And these cubs were just maybe 10, 20 feet up into the aspens, playing around, gnawing at each other, fighting. I mean, it's the cutest thing ever. And they weren't letting anyone stop on the road because obviously everyone wants to stop to see the bears, but there's nowhere to stop safely. So what I did was actually pretty funny. I sort of started going back and forth. I was looping the road. I was driving down, a half mile, turning around, driving back, and spraying shots literally out of my window as I went. This is as fleeting of a wildlife sighting as it can be, and it's not as glorious as finding an animal on your own in the woods. But it just goes back to prove the point that wildlife sightings can be fleeting, and it's important to make the most out of every opportunity you're given. So in this case, I dialed in my settings. I drove by maybe 7 times and sprayed shots, and one of these came out pretty good. It's not fully in focus, but it's sharp enough for my liking, and it's a really adorable picture, and the framing and the cropping that I was able to work with after the fact was pretty great. So make the most of every sighting you're given. Really, when we're at the mercy of our subjects, we need to make the most of what we're given. Sometimes the light isn't ideal, still worth taking a few photos. Anytime you see an animal, in my opinion. In terms of camera settings, I shoot in 2 modes, mostly aperture priority. Now, the reason being for that is that when I shoot in aperture priority, I am able to respond to my environment much more quickly. So oftentimes, when you're shooting wildlife, you're usually shooting pretty low apertures. So in my case, I usually shoot between 2.8 and 5.6. 2.8 for if I'm pretty far from an animal, low light, maximize light. 5.6 if I'm trying to capture more of an animal. Let's say you're photographing an elk or a moose or something like that. You might want to bump up that aperture a little bit to get more of the depth of the animal in focus. So when I'm shooting aperture priority, I keep my aperture relatively low, and I really adjust my shutter speed based on my ISO. So when I'm shooting wildlife, I tend to shoot at higher shutter speeds, right? On average, I'd say 1/400th to 1/800th. Sometimes with slower animals or animals that are standing perfectly still, I can shoot down to 1/200th or 250. And sometimes with faster animals like eagles or birds or something that's running, I might be shooting one 1000th, one, 1250, even one 2000 sometimes with birds. And I sort of am mindful as I go out of what my ISO is at, what my shutter's at when I'm shooting on aperture priority. So when I go out, the first thing I do when I enter the forest is I point my camera at a dark object, I focus, and I get a reading on what my shutter speed is. So let's say I pointed, at a tree and a dark tree, and it's 1/100th. My ISO is at 200. Well, I'm going to bring up my ISO to 1000 so that I can get that 1/500th speed for my shutter speed, and be ready to respond by preparing beforehand and sort of anticipating wildlife showing up, and having my shutter speed ready before I go. Super, super helpful. I can't tell you the number of times I've missed a shot because I, walked from one area into like a darker area and there was an animal that showed up and I got all excited and I missed I took 1,000 photos and came home to realize that my shutter speed was like 1/60th and I was like, gah. So really continuously thinking about your environment when you're working from areas of light into dark or vice versa. Of course, we're always trying to minimize ISO as photographers, but super, super useful to always be thinking, always sort of refocusing. It takes a split second. Focus, read it, adjust, keep moving. So very useful. And then sometimes I'll be in a situation where I'm sitting still, where I'm being silent, where I'm waiting on the side of a meadow to see if an elk or a moose will come out into it that I've seen there before, and I'll shoot in manual. And there I can sort of be more present and sort of work with my settings more than if I'm on the go, when you might see an animal cross, for a split second, and you want to be ready to lift up your camera and capture it. In terms of focuses, autofocus, I tend to use single autofocus the most. I find that it's the most accurate, at least in my uses. I use a very small point and I usually focus on an area of high contrast where there's light colors and dark colors. Generally with animals, I'm trying to focus on the eyes or on the nose, somewhere on the face. And I'm usually shooting single autofocus, given the opportunity. Sometimes an animal cooperates or you see it and you can shoot single autofocus, and sometimes an animal is moving faster than you anticipated and you might need to switch into continuous autofocus. So what I actually did on my camera here on the EM1, I don't know if any of you shoot with it, is on this back part of the camera, there's a little lever, and I have it mapped to switch between single autofocus and continuous autofocus in a split second. So I don't need to go into the menu and change it and all that jazz. I can sort of just hit the switch and boom, I'm in continuous autofocus. I can refocus on the animal and it will keep it in focus. I find that the continuous autofocus with tracking on these Olympus cameras has been incredible. It's not as reliable as that single autofocus, but that single autofocus isn't reliable at all if an animal is moving a lot, because you're going to miss, 80% of the shots. So that continuous autofocus, even though it'll miss one here and there, overall it's been incredible, tack sharp photos, and has really set me up for success. All this new technology in the mirrorless cameras is really taking it to the next level in terms of capturing impactful moments in wildlife photography. Composition. So this is sort of, the big thing in the forest. Composition can be tricky. You're working in dense environments with a lot of brush, a lot of stuff. Sometimes there's an animal, through some really ugly branches, and you have to find a way to shoot it. You have to get creative. You have to sort of anticipate what's going to come to you before it comes to you. So I think thinking before it happens, and sort of anytime you're navigating the forest, not only am I being mindful about my surroundings, not only am I being mindful about the animal's home and my settings, I'm also being mindful of the area I'm in. When I enter a new area, I'm like, well, what could make for some cool compositions here? Like, what if I had, a moose cross across this river? Like, what would be neat? Or would I be able to change my positioning in the event that it did? And of course, this helps even more when you're coming back to certain areas and you're more familiar with areas. You're like, oh, I know there's a tree back there. I can walk around and get a clearer view. So thinking before it happens and getting creative in tricky situations. Sometimes you don't have an ideal view. And I think the photo that I picked here In the background, this is a bull moose up high in an alpine valley here in Grand Teton in August of last year as well. Was deep in the bushes, wasn't really going to come out. And of course, I'm not going to go back and chase an animal, get up in its face. That's never something we want to do. So I had to sort of work with my surroundings and see if I could find a crack. And I found this crack. There was just a little glimpse of light working through that you can sort of see bouncing off of his nose here. And I was able to use the bokeh of the lit up leaves in the foreground to create a sort of interesting composition where you're giving the effect of looking through the forest, really seeing an animal hiding in its natural environment. And I think that getting creative sometimes when you don't have a clear line of sight is one of the greatest things we can do, because not only are you making the most of the situation, you're also sometimes capturing some pretty unique and powerful images. So really don't let yourself be limited by the fact that there's, a ton of brush in front of you. Get creative, slow down, be present, and focus on the animal and the moment, and just enjoying it for what it is too. In terms of composition, some of the basic and really useful things that I always suggest to people is create depth. Creating depth in your image by using telephoto lenses, by using bokeh in the foreground, in the background, giving yourself as much distance between you and your subject and between the subject and your background is really important. And I think it's important to note that in wildlife photography, the background is very often the most important part of a photo. You could have, similar to the light, you could have an incredible animal encounter with a terrible background, and the photo isn't going to be nearly as good as if it's a more average encounter, but a really beautiful background. So creating depth, really, really important. And one of the ways we do that is by using a low point of view. So I always try to shoot at the animal's eye level or below. And what that does is, if you think about it, think of yourself standing up on a hill looking down at, an elk down in a meadow. When you're shooting from up above, the background of the animal down there is the floor behind it when you're looking from above it. If you're laying on the ground below it, the background might be the sky or a tree in the distance, or, whatever it is. So you're creating much more distance between your subject and the world behind it. Sometimes in the forest we can't do that, and that involves getting creative in different ways. Using bokeh to your advantage, as is the case here in this photo. And once again, distance can be a blessing. Having distance to your animal, if you're using the right gear, if you're using a long telephoto lens like this 300 f4 prime, which has a 600 millimeter field of view, it's really awesome for the size. It can be a blessing. The more distance you have, the more sort of draw you can create in your photo to lead the eye naturally to your subject. I always think about that when I'm taking a photo. Where's my eye naturally going to be drawn to? Are there any distractions in my frame? How can I improve that? So yeah, those are some quick tips on composition. With that said, I'll share with you a couple stories from the wild. 3 photos that I'm really, really stoked on that I've taken in the last year, and some cool stories behind them that sort of relate back to all these concepts I've been talking about for the last few minutes, that I think will sort of give you guys some more insight into how I go about capturing this and how it actually came to be in the moment. So this is an image I created last March or February, I don't remember. It's called Forest Spies. And this is a great gray owl that I photographed in an area where the owls spend the winter here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And it was a very tricky day. The light wasn't always working in our favor. This image is shot at ISO 4000. There was a lot of dense brush, but we were spending a lot of time with this owl. This owl was very comfortable with our presence, and we were being very silent, sort of giving it every opportunity to do what it needs to do to hunt. Again, going back to knowing your subject, this owl, like I mentioned, is a great gray owl, and they use their supersonic hearing, basically. They can hear a rodent 100 feet away, 2 feet deep in the snow, with pinpoint precision. It's incredible what they're able to do. So silence was essential in maintaining the well-being of this animal and giving ourselves the best shot at capturing a good image by spending the most time possible around this animal. So I had to work with really, really dense brush in this environment. I had to sort of walk very calmly, quietly, and slowly around this animal, making sure to keep its own well-being in mind, taking note of any signs of discomfort, which it never exhibited, thankfully, and getting in a position where I can sort of find a crack in the brush and find some sort of a composition where I have enough distance between the subject, and oftentimes in this case it was a really sort of ugly, blurry background, which sort of I made the best of by underexposing this shot here. But really dense brush, just brown branches, and sort of made the best of this scenario by being patient and sort of thinking about where I could position myself in relation to the animal to capture the moment best. Working with my subject, so knowing this owl, knowing that it was on the hunt, knowing that I needed to remain quiet, allowed it to remain comfortable around me. And this image came at the very tail end of the day, which goes to show that sometimes high ISOs are needed. It's not. I'm not going to pass up on a wildlife opportunity unless I'm at ridiculously high ISOs. I'll always at least take the photo, come home and see what it looks like. Again, these days with post-processing, incredible software, we can get rid of noise like we never could before. And this image came out pretty crispy for how high the ISO was. And again, never pass up a sighting. These sightings can be fleeting. You never know when you're going to see another great gray owl. And it's easy, the more you get into wildlife photography, to sort of pigeonhole yourself into this idea of like, oh, well, like I see moose every day, but like, you don't know if you'll see one tomorrow or next week or in the next, 2 weeks, or, black bears in this case this morning. I'm really trying to make the most out of the black bears here while they're still awake before they go into hibernation in about a month and a half. So never pass up a sighting. This was Forest Spies. On to the next one here. This is Adele, and this is probably my favorite story to tell when it comes to wildlife photography. This is a young black bear that I spent 5 days straight with here in Grand Teton National Park. I spent about 2-3 hours a day with her for 5 days. I sort of found her one day by complete chance. I was hiking in an area I go hiking very frequently here in the early mornings, and I was hiking on the trail, and she sort of caught me by surprise that she was sleeping right off the trail, maybe like 30, 40 feet from where I was. So instantly very, caught by surprise, and I gave her some distance, and sort of just started watching her, and she sort of woke up and looked at me and went back to sleep. And when an animal goes to sleep in front of you, it generally means they trust you. When they go to sleep in front of you, or if they're nursing their young in front of you, it's signs of trust. So I sort of sat still and watched her for a while, and she was in some decently thick brush, no clear angles. And so I went back day after day and spent more time with her. And this sort of ties back to an idea that I don't think I've touched on, but knowing your subject a little more, knowing not just the species that you're going after, but what are the animals in your area acting like? A black bear in Florida has very different mannerisms and habits than a black bear in Colorado, than a black bear here in Wyoming. They're the same species, but the level of adaptation across the same species based on different geographical areas is pretty astounding. And so knowing your subject a little more really helps. In this case, I knew where Adele was. I named her Adele just because, I don't know, I thought it was an endearing name. And I came back day after day and spent more time, and she started, clearly recognizing me, and she would, a lot of the times she was sleeping, so I was just sitting there waiting, watching her sleep, and, from a safe distance. And eventually one day, she sort of gave me the opportunity as she woke up from a nap, which is when this picture was taken, gave me a good long stretch, lifted her head above a bush that she was hiding behind for hours, and gave me the opportunity to capture this image. And, this came after 5 days of waiting out there for several hours a day, spending time with her, sort of getting to know her habits, what she was eating, what trees she liked to sleep under. So it goes back to silence and stillness and how patience really does bring results. And lastly, this image. This is an image I titled Black on Black. Probably the most memorable and special wildlife encounter I've ever had in my life. And it was a fleeting moment. And this sort of goes back to the idea of really being prepared for anything. So to sort of set the scene behind this, this was an early morning in Yellowstone National Park, and I was sort of driving around some roads I had been exploring in the past where a few wolves are present. And a few miles down the road, there were some people waiting for wolves. And I decided, well, I'm not in the business of getting an image that's half a mile away from a wolf. I'm just going to go look for black bears. It's really what I was focused on. So I started driving around some lesser known areas, and I made my way down this road and saw this big black figure down in the grass, and I was like, oh God, it's a black bear. And then it lifted its head, and little did I know it wasn't a black bear, it was a really big black wolf. And incredible, it just sends chills down your spine when you see an animal like that, especially a wolf that are so hard to see even at 100 yards distance. So really what I had to do here was make the most of this sighting. It was early morning. I was shooting relatively high ISOs, but I was ready before I had gone down this sort of winding road that was a little bit more shaded. I had gotten my ISO ready, and I was ready to seize any opportunity. Early in the morning, some of these sightings can be really, really fleeting. Midday, sometimes you get lucky and you spend a little more time with an animal, but in this case, it was fleeting. And so this wolf sort of meandered his way and came up towards where I had pulled over my car this morning. And I got back in the car because he was making his way in my direction. And he sort of walked by the car and walked out back. And I was shooting with another person that day. And as he was sort of making his way into the woods, oftentimes as an animal walks away, we think, oh, it's a butt shot. I'm not going to bother shooting it. I stayed very, very patient and mindful while, my companion was sort of freaking out at the fact we had just seen a wolf. I was too internally, but I thought that there might be something more. And as he leapt up this hill to get back into the forest, he sort of jumped onto this black log and paused in this pose that you see here and looked back at us. And because I was ready for this moment, because I was really, really mindful about every little detail of what was going on. I had noticed that log in the past, and as he walked up the hill, I was like, well, you never know. He jumps up. I had the time to take like 5 clicks before he disappeared into the woods. And luckily, one of these came out sharp. I was shooting against challenging conditions, but I had the gear and the settings that were ready to go at the time to be able to capture this image. So a couple other sort of pointers for this one is go off the beaten path. A lot of people are capturing photos in places like national parks where there's hundreds of photographers on the road waiting for a bear. But I think that there's value in sort of seeking your own peace, your own wilderness, your own silence and stillness, and sort of letting nature come to you and not forcing things, like I was saying once again, and being opportunistic, being ready to seize the moment and take powerful images when nature gives you the opportunity to, which it undoubtedly will, and being mindful and being present. And everything we've talked about here sort of comes back to this idea of giving yourself the best odds at creating your own luck, at capturing images that are powerful, that have good light, and that will last and bring memories for years to come. So with that said, thanks so much for listening. I think Mishala is going to hop back on here, and I'll be taking a few questions. Really excited to handle a few of them.
Awesome. That was so cool, Art. Thank you. If you want to go ahead and yeah, there we go. So we did have a lot of comments coming through, and Brooke has been in the comment section saying how beautiful your images are. We did have somebody just pop up a question. Let me dig it back out here. One sec. Bear with me, guys. Get it? Bear with me. Brooke's question for you while I look for this other one is, what is your most memorable wildlife sighting?
Well, Brooke, if I'm answering that in your scope, I think my most memorable wildlife sighting is when the great gray owl landed on your head.
I remember that.
I think that was pretty memorable. That day was epic. So that little bear I showed you guys earlier in the presentation where it's the bear climbing in the fall foliage. That's actually the moment I met Brooke in person. We had been friends for like years on Instagram, and I showed up. She had sent me a pin. She's like, oh, there's a bear here. Come on down. And I showed up, and there was Brooke, and there was a little bear. And I'm like, oh, look, it's Brooke, little bear. And later that day is when the owl landed on her head. Beyond that, my most memorable wildlife sighting, without a doubt, is that wolf. I mean, seeing a wolf, having the opportunity to be 5 yards from a wolf when he walked by my car is something that I'll never forget, and something that I frankly think about every single day.
It's a really amazing picture. I would be very afraid, like your companion. I would be like hiding in the car. No, thank you. But it's an amazing, amazing photo. And this has popped up a couple of times while you were talking about some other images.
Yeah.
But do you use silent mode when you're out kind of shooting, especially around wildlife? Photographing, sorry.
It depends on the animals. It depends on the animals and the distance I am from the animals. When I'm around other photographers, I tend to use silent mode because I don't like when people hear my shutter. Um, when I'm around animals like owls, um, I'm often using silent shutter. When I'm around bigger animals like moose, maybe not necessarily. It also comes back to like what the shutter speed is that I'm looking for. So obviously the silent modes have faster shutters. So sometimes I'll switch into silent mode just to get a faster shutter. But anytime I'm shooting in pro capture, it's naturally on silent shutter.
Yeah.
So most of the time it's silent.
Nice. Okay. This one is a personal preference thing for you, I believe. Do you wear camo in the forest? What is your forest attire?
I don't wear camo in the forest, especially in bear country. I think there's value to being able to be noticed by an animal when there could be grizzly bears around, at least where I live. I also don't try to wear, I know Brooke's going to laugh at this one because when we were out in Yellowstone, I wore the most ridiculous outfit with like neon yellow pants on a snowmobile adventure. But I try not to wear neon colors because I try not to either like spook animals either. Hunters will often wear neon colors. So I tend to just wear neutral colors, gray, blue, basically my entire closet.
Natural. Question from Susan. How does Arthur feel about auto ISO or back button focusing? Do you use either of those?
So when I started out, I was using auto ISO quite a bit. Not all the time, but I sort of used auto ISO when I was starting out to see what my camera would naturally lean towards, right? So like I'd put myself in aperture priority mode with auto ISO, and instantly your camera is going to calibrate the ISO and it'll give you a reading, but then I would adjust it based on that. So if I was using auto ISO and my shutter speed was good, I wouldn't look past it. But if I was using auto ISO and my shutter speed was a little low, then I would take it upon myself to bump it up. The reason why I stopped doing that is because I got so used to it that there were times where, like I said, I would get really excited about a wildlife sighting, and the auto ISO, just like this happened to me in May. I was with my friend Tiffany Taxis, who's another Olympus photographer, really talented. And we had 399, this grizzly bear with her 4 cubs, like right by us, and it was snowing. It was so beautiful. And I had my camera. I was so excited. I hadn't seen her that year. I was like a little kid in a candy store, just like clicking away. Little did I know, my ISO was on auto, and my shutter speed ended up being way too low. And I came home like, okay, I need to stop using auto ISO because it basically backstabbed me enough times that I was like, I just want to be constantly mindful of everything I'm doing on my camera. So it's useful at first, but I'd say try to veer away from it as you grow into your camera and your settings.
Cool. I think I know the answer to this, but we'll go ahead and ask it. Are you using a tripod with the bear in the bushes or with the black wolf? Or more specifically, do you find yourself using a tripod when you're out?
No, for wildlife, I don't think any of my photos on my Instagram that are wildlife photos are mounted on a tripod. I've really relied on the in-body image stabilization on the Olympus cameras so much. It's next level. I've been posting 600 millimeter field of view, so like this 300 f4 video on my feed. That's handheld video, and I shoot it in slow-mo on the Olympus and 120 FPS just to sort of give myself a little bit smoother because there's always a little bit of shake. But even handheld video is at 600 millimeters is like totally fine.
Yes, I would agree. I never use a tripod. The only time I use a tripod is for like night sky stuff. That's when I bust it out. But other than that,
landscapes. I use it, but not really wildlife.
Yeah, especially when you're hiking, it's hard to carry a tripod on a hike.
Yeah, I travel light.
Yeah. Somebody is asking, Belinda is asking, Art, what software do you use when you're dealing with noise? Do you use any specific software? What do you edit with?
So I edit, I import all my photos into Lightroom first. I use Lightroom, the basic, not classic, but just Lightroom for most of the time. I really like the layout in there. Um, Sometimes I'll use the denoise on Lightroom if it's light noise. For really high noise, like that ISO 4000 photo of the owl that I showed you guys, that photo I processed in Topaz denoise afterwards. I love Topaz's programs. I think the denoise is far better than anything on Lightroom. And occasionally, you know, if a photo really needs some heavier work, I'll bring it into Photoshop. But generally, for 95% or more of my photos, I'm using Lightroom. And I topaz denoise almost every photo before printing it. Not necessarily posting, but before print, I always use Topaz. It's really a great software. I can't recommend it highly enough, honestly.
Yeah, we hear that on almost every episode of this, that people love
It's
Topaz.
awesome.
So if you haven't tried Topaz,
It's the best.
the message is you need to go try Topaz.
Yeah,
I don't work for Topaz.
definitely.
I definitely work for somebody has asked multiple people have asked because it wasn't on your gear list, but I'm probably going to assume you do use teleconverters with those lenses. Do you ever use them?
Yeah, so about a year ago, I was shooting mostly, the only teleconverter I had in my arsenal was the two-time teleconverter, the MC20. Um, that's a great one, but I sort of went back to the 1.4. It's a little bit sharper. Of course, the downside of using teleconverters is sort of loss of sharpness. With the 1.4, I've been able to capture images of, there's an image of an eagle on my portfolio on my Instagram that I captured at 840 millimeters, which was just that converter placed on this 300 f4. So, you know, the equivalent is like 840, I think, at 5.6, and it worked wonders. So I will use them. I try not to. You know, it's a fine line to balance between adding a teleconverter or cropping in a little, you know. I find that's a line that I walk a lot. I'm like, well, should I just get a sharper image and crop in, or should I sacrifice it? So if it's a really distant subject, I'll usually slap on the teleconverter, and they work great. I've had great success with them.
Yeah, I love my 1.4 so much. It's one of my favorites. I use
Yeah,
it for
it's awesome.
sports, though. Not animals. I'm not that
That's
talented.
challenging too. Challenging too.
Right. Mine are just small children animals.
Children are animals.
I just saw one and it popped up. Oh, somebody asked if you photograph alone or use the buddy system. Do you generally go out by yourself, or do you try to have a companion so that someone knows where you are?
Depends on what I'm doing. When I'm photographing bears, I try to go with someone. I think that's a good idea. It's never good to be alone with a bear that's not having his best day, so to say. If I'm going into an area where I don't really fear for much, or I've been multiple times, or I'm photographing an animal that maybe is a little bit more relaxed, you know, something like a fox, something like a moose, where I, you know, can keep a safe distance and not worry as much about it turning aggressive, then I'll go alone. I really like going out alone. I think it's conducive to sort of entering this sort of meditative state and being present, this sort of thing that I've been talking about throughout this whole hour. And I find that sometimes I get distracted when I'm with a friend, but sometimes I also have a lot more fun. You know, I love shooting I have a ton of photographer friends. Brooke is one of my favorite people to shoot with. You know, we always have a lot of fun out there sort of galloping through the fields. And when things are slow, you know, you have someone else to shoot the shit with and have fun.
This is a live broadcast, everybody. Sorry. So I'm going to wrap it up a little bit because we're a little over time tonight. First, I want to say thank you everyone who tuned in tonight, because that was super awesome of you guys to come support what we're doing here. And we do really appreciate that you come and learn with us on Home with Olympus and all of our other various live streaming events. Definitely don't forget to check out our Into the Forest page and learn some more tips and tricks about exploring the forest in a conscientious and caring way, and enter our forest photography contest. We have one in the US. We also have a separate contest for Europe, so make sure you're mindful of that. If you're in North America, we're a different page than the European page. So check that out. So I have one question for you, Arthur. It's my favorite question to ask the wildlife photographers that we have on the show. What animal have you not photographed before that you are dying to capture?
Do I have to pick one?
I suppose not.
I guess the first one is the one that's around my neck. It's a polar bear.
Oh,
I have not photographed polar bears. That's a big goal of mine. And my focus has always been on high latitude regions and sort of polar areas. So I think that's an important animal to capture when you like the polar regions. Beyond that, I really want to get some jaguar photos. I think that's my number one other than the polar bear. Jaguars down in Brazil in the Pantanal would be a dream.
That would be very awesome. I look forward to the day where you share those images with us.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah. All right. Well, Art, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing all of that information and your expertise on how you photograph animals in the wild. And we've gotten a lot of comments about how great this was and how thankful people are that you did this show. So again, thank you for your time and joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you to everyone else who joined. If you guys have more questions, I'm always happy to help friendly folks on Instagram. Just shoot me a message on Instagram, and until next time.
Yeah. Have a great afternoon, guys. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.